Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Siri on the message boards, and I'm a senior world designer who works on Lord of the Rings. Last week, we saw the launch of our expansion pack, The Kingdoms of Harad, which is like really exciting for us this time of year. Always the excitement of the expansion pack, and then the frenzied chaos of the expansion pack all kind of combined to make for a really exciting past week. You know, there were some issues that hopefully we have, significant issues, anyways, that we have ironed out with the legendary item system. I know that bench went live today. But today, we are not here to talk about that. Today, we are here to talk about the cartography of Ghala, the Ridge of Plenty, the regions encompassing Adagim, Kijan, Ansharu, and Idagal that you all jumped into and started exploring last week. We're going to talk a little bit this week specifically about what goes into the details, the nitty gritty, the creation of our landscape, kind of taking you behind the scenes into the landscape development process. For those of you that are unfamiliar with this stream, this is a world design focused stream. So I'm going to be talking a lot about things related to world design, level design, and that sort of thing. I'm going to do my best to stay away from spoilers because not everyone has jumped into this expansion pack yet or has completed all of the content in it yet. So I'm going to try my best to avoid talking about anything story related or anything that might be considered spoilers. I was talking with Maid of Lions a little bit too, and specifically we want to avoid talking about things that encompass the details regarding the Song of Waves and Wind. So any questions I see about those, I'm probably going to shy away from them. I might defer questions until a later stream once the expansion pack has had a little bit more life to live before we start thinking about next updates and whatnot. So the focus of this stream, like I said, we're looking at the process of building the landscape. Last year, I did a similar stream for the introduction to the cartography of Shagana. And there's going to be a bit of overlap here. So if you're familiar with that stream, you kind of maybe you did some homework last week and you over the last week and you watched the cartography of Shagana stream. You might see some slides that are a little familiar. Some of that is again the overlap between Shagana, mostly Ikerbon, because I believe Ikerbon and Mirjala are all considered Shagana or near Harad. I do want to apologize too. During this presentation, it just timed out weirdly that people are coming to do end of season gutter cleaning on the house. So you may hear some additional voices walking around. You may hear some noises from outside as they do the work out there. I'm going to try to do my best to talk over that so you all can hear me. So yeah, with that in mind, let's get started. Here we are right now looking at the view of Emok's Duel, kind of the end cap landscape portion of the expansion pack. We do have several instances. Each region has an instance associated with it that we are going to be doing bull roar testing on soon, and that we are going to be doing, we've already done kind of the previews of the spaces. We're going to be doing the bull roar testing probably within the next couple of weeks. I'm not sure exactly what the schedule is for that, but definitely pay attention to the message boards as you are looking at things. Pay attention to Discord as you're looking at things, and you'll be able to get all the information about when you could pop into Bullroar to test out the instance spaces. I know they are currently in active test mode right now with our QA team, and we're finding good bugs, and so hopefully we will be ready for Bullroar when we're ready for Bullroar. So, with that all in mind, I'm going to turn on the presentation that we have here. So we have the cartography of Mirjala. I'm going to see if I can reduce my size just a little bit so I'm not eating up too much real estate in this presentation. So here we go. Hopefully everyone is ready for this. Last time I did this too, I know a lot of people were kind of waiting until the end to ask questions. If you do have any questions, please feel free to ask them in chat. I'm happy to answer what I can, whether that is waiting to the end or as we're going through the slides and you see something that you are curious about in the moment. Feel free to just drop a note in the stream chat, and I'll do my best to answer them. So before we go into the details, kind of here's what our process through this presentation is going to be. We're going to talk about the layout of Ghala. We're going to talk about height maps. We're talking about terrain sampling and construction, which is what I use to build the initial height maps for everything. We're going to talk about our planning process, landscape implementation, maps and UI updates, and then we'll leave room at the end as well for questions. Fusselheim says, when you design a medium-sized interior, not something like Edoras or the throne room in Minas Tirith, more like a pub in the Yondershire, do you have some kind of storyboard or scribble where each furniture should go, or do you just do it spontaneous on a whim? I think largely we lean into spontaneity on that. When we're building, we do also have the opportunity to look at things from the top-down perspective. So it's almost like we're looking at a floor plan while we're working on those things. So I think we kind of approach it both at a high level when we're just blocking out the space like it's a floor plan, and then we zoom in and are actually kind of in the space with our camera, in our tools, figuring out, oh, a chair would go here, the shadows would look good there. So it's a mix of both. Alrighty, so on to our first slide. So here's the layout of Ghala. So those of you that watched the Shigana stream, the Cartography of Shigana stream, you may notice a little bit of familiarity here. The northern parts of this map are what we presented last year. You can see Kudzagin, you can see Imular, and you can see some of the markers and whatnot throughout all of it. I should note too that this map is a planning map, so it does not completely accurately reflect what is actually built in game, because often when we're building the landscape, we will do a rough planning map like this and kind of just sketch out where we think roads should go. Oh, this road should go here, this road should go there, and we're not really thinking too specifically or too directly about what landforms might be there. You can see on this all the different colors kind of representing the different styles of terrain that might be there. So like we knew we wanted Zajana to be kind of in this like crotch between two mountains, and we knew what we wanted for, and unfortunately you can't really see it because of our area layouts here, but we did have paint downs and whatnot for all the different regions, kind of indicating the kind of terrain that we're expecting those spaces to be. So as we're like thinking about just the general layout of space, the idea of like this major mountain is exactly here is not something that we really adhere to. These are more broad strokes of this is the kind of biome we want in this space. This is the sort of thing that feels good here, and this is the general rough layout of how we want it, the general rough shape of how we want it. We can modify it a little bit all the way up until when we start building landscape, and then once we actually start building the landscape, that's when the wiggle room comes in, right? Like, okay, so if you're familiar at all with Kijan, for example, you'll notice that Zajana, the road feels pretty like north-south from Kudzagin, and it goes down south towards Zajana. And in the reality, the way the landscape worked, the landscape we built worked, it kind of, you go south and then you go east a little bit and then you go south again. And some of that is allowing us the flexibility to have a general sense of what the landscape is going to be, and then also give us the room to explore landforms and shapes, or if something we generate in our tools like looks really, really good, and we're like, oh, okay, well, let's just move Zajana this way a little bit. So this is where we were and where we are. So where we were represents what the landscape looked like prior to the patch, prior to update 46, and in fact probably prior to even update 45, because a lot of the landscape that became Merjala was implemented in, or was published as part of a patch in update 45, even though it wasn't accessible. So you can see here the difference in, what the landscape looked like. Even this too. This is Kudzagin, because I didn't have quite the archival information that I was looking for. So this is more of a base height map from pre Ikerbon, or the original height map for Ikerbon, and then what it turned into. You can see the lake beds of Idagal here. You can see the marshes of Adagim. The higher up in elevation you go, the brighter the colors are. So you can see here these mountains are like pretty tall mountains. You can see them when you're in client. They are very tall mountains, and that's represented here in this grayscale height map as well. The brightest parts of the map of these images are the highest ones up there. So Mr. Alex asks, speaking of maps, is it possible to update the maps into more modern style? The current map system is just the old with different art. I think there's certainly an interest in doing that. Our UI system is not the greatest. It does what it needs to do, but it does not have a lot of the modern functionality that modern games have. So in order to make it something like that, would require considerable UI work to rework a lot of things. Not that it's out of reach, but it is something that, as we think about what we want to build and what our priorities are over the years, it is something that is always kind of a like, okay, can we do this? Do we have the space to do this? I know there are some little quality of life things regarding maps that we definitely want to try to do, but I don't know when they're going to be on the radar, as it were. So next up we have terrain sampling. So the way I tend to build things, usually I end up being the person to do the initial first pass height map. For many years, a lot of whenever we would start a new region, we would hand make the height map. We would sculpt our own mountains. We would, by hand in World Builder. And that takes a considerable amount of time. Thinking about things like Vales of Anduin and Arid Mithrin, the White Mountains. Those spaces originally started as hand sculpted mountains that we had to smooth and polish. And usually how we start building those landforms is we figure out the maximum height we want for something, and we just kind of like set that height in a section there and then draw ramps down to build the mountain forms. And the bigger the mountains, the more of a headache that is, because you can only load so much landscape before everything gets a little cranky. So I leverage a tool called World Machine, which has kind of a blueprints style system for creating realistic looking landscapes in it. You have all sorts of modifiers and whatnot that you can apply to different types of filters, and often what I end up doing is I come up with a series of samples. As you can see here on this slide, these samples kind of represent different sorts of shapes of terrain. You've got some here like this one, which is kind of like billowy rolling hills. You've got this one here, which is, still a little rolling hills, but a little bit steeper. You've got these two here in the middle that are more like sharp ridge lines with some intense erosion going on in them. So as we talk about what we want each region to have in it, we think about the shapes that could build that region. So I'm basically kind of creating stamps using this. Once we have those figured out and exported, which I have here, these are all samples that were used in the creation of the landscapes for, I think, basically everything except for Adagim. But all the other regions use these as their base. Of the four regions, Otagame is the one that I think had Otagame and Itagal had the most by hand landscape sculpting, um, and then Kijan and Ansharu leveraged this technique a little bit more extensively. So what I do in these spaces, and here we'll look at another terrain sample, for example. So this is kind of showing the representation in 3D of what this map looks like. And we're liking how these forms look. They feel like they're good mountains. You know, we want the Merjala ridgeline to be this imposing, impressive geographic feature that kind of blocks a lot of weather and a lot of the, you know, the environment away from it. And so these steep mountains really kind of achieved what we were wanting to do. Um, from there, I take all of these samples that we have and I bring them into Photoshop. And it is a little funny to think how years and years and years ago, landscape-based games, whether they were open world or not, um, all used Photoshop to kind of start their terrain, right? Like Asheron's Call, you could sculpt the terrain a little bit in Asheron's Call if you wanted to in tools, but it was kind of a headache. And it was significantly more effective to do that work in Photoshop. And for a while with Lotro, we were doing it all. We were doing all of the mountain sculpting by hand, but it still just you couldn't get like the weathering, the erosion, the natural features in it that we really wanted to achieve because we know we are an older game and we want to do the things we can to make the game look and feel more modern. And so these tools are a great way for us to do this. So you can see here in this capture, this white outline that you're seeing through everything, that's kind of meant to demarcate the boundaries of what we are producing for the expansion pack. And then you can see and so that's layer 2 there. And then you can see all the different layers. So I had different groups for different regions, everything, copying, samples from the terrain samples that I made and like adjusting their brightness and scale and making selections to feather them out so that they blend smoothly. So it's a lot of just taking those stamps and using those stamps to construct the height map at large. You can also see here too where we have the rivers and whatnot kind of called out in here too. It gets a little vaguer up through here. And those are also things that we lay down as layers in Photoshop, often sampling what the original height map had for heights so that we're maintaining the values that we want so that when we bring it into our tools, we're going to bring it into World Builder from Photoshop, everything is at the right level. King Cookie asks, what decides how much hand painting versus sample generation you do? It really depends on what we're trying to achieve in the landscape. I think Itagal probably represents the area of this expansion pack that had the most handwork done to it after this layering pass was done, because the designer working on it, we were trying to get close to some of the features that we wanted, but we weren't quite able to hit exactly where we wanted. So there was a lot of handwork done with that. Urashtar in the Ikerbarn Valley is another example to that, where I was wanting to build these tall, steep canyons with impressive cliffs, and I kept running into issues where the sampling and the terrains I was generating in World Machine were just not quite making the right feel. So ultimately, what I ended up doing was hand building the different levels for things. Like, I want the tops of the plateaus to be here, and then I want these valleys to be here, and I'm setting the heights through all of them, and then bringing that whole landscape that I created in World Builder, exporting it out into a grayscale image like this, and then bringing it into World Machine to use it to add some extra weathering details and geologic details in there. So like the thermal weathering that you see, where it's just like these creases in the landscape that are really hard to paint. But if we have simulations help us do that with setting the parameters that we want, how deep we want the channels and whatnot, it allows us to kind of blend the two styles of hand painting the terrain and then softening the landscape with those extra overlays. So the biggest benefit of approaching landscape in this way is it takes a process that was usually at least a couple of weeks to build one region. Um, the height map for one region it takes a couple weeks to do that in the old way. This way, I built all of this lands. I was able to build all of this landscape over the course of 3 to 5 days. Um, So it helps us accelerate the initial implementation of our height map considerably. And especially with the quick turnaround time that's often needed in a live game experience, being able to reduce that overhead is huge for us because it allows us to get the height maps into review sooner, show them off to everyone on the team, and get their feedback and thoughts on shape forms. It allows the initial height maps that I'm producing for my other team members, allows them to look at something and give feedback on it, and then we can go into cycles of iteration much quicker. And I think that's a really important thing for us, considering the size of our team, is that that need to be able to iterate quickly, to respond to feedback quickly, internally is significant. Um, so once we build that first height map and we kind of know where the boundaries of the land are, we move into planning. And you can see here, this is kind of our first planning map for the expansion pack. Um, Mr. Alex asks, is there a limit on how many square meters of landscape you can make per update? So I would say that it's always kind of a moving target. Some expansion packs have more landscape, others have smaller landscapes. You know, I think we often um, over deliver on the amount of landscape. It's something that we're excited about these new tools. It's something that we have to have conversations with the content team about how much can be supported. Do we want to focus on the concept of critical path through a region, and that's where the content experience is focused? So those sorts of things. I think if we were talking like upper limits, the last couple of expansion packs we've introduced 4 regions for each expansion pack, and those are significant spaces. And I think that in part was us really, really wanting to get as much of Harad built as we could before we decide to move on to other regions in the game, other areas in the game. It does give us plenty of room to expand on those areas because I feel like there are spaces in all of these regions that they are largely explorable spaces, but that does give them room for further additions in the future if we so desire. Um, so I would say the amount of landscape produced in this expansion pack, in Legacy of Morgoth, and honestly in Corsairs of Umbar, those all kind of represent the upper end of the size of landscapes that we want to produce. And I feel like all those 3 are kind of experimental in terms of like what is the size of a landscape that we can produce, how quickly can we produce it, and how effectively can we support the main content path through those spaces. Um, so back to the planning map here, you can see we have our initial planning map. What you see here kind of are simple markers and cues to indicate to our team internally where everything is. You can see the light brown roads through everything. We've called out all of the quest hubs and major POIs, or most of the quest hubs and major POIs throughout all of this. If you look at like all of them, I believe, with the exception of Idagal, all of them had additional smaller hubs added to them as part of development in order to better support things like travel and navigation. Like out of game, we have Livarth and Sulmadash noted there, but there are actually two other smaller hubs in that region as well. Kijan has a couple of small hubs added to it. It's not just Zajana. I think there's 3 hubs actually that aren't noted on that map. So this is just our general broad, high level, like here's where the waterways are, here's where the major roads are likely to be, here's where we kind of want the hubs, here are the major POIs that are kind of anchoring all of these regions. And then from there, that gets put into a planning document where we talk about things like our monster plan. We talk about what our camps are going to be. We talk about what rare monsters we want in the space, or even just with the monster plan, how frequently certain types of monsters will appear there. We do also try to leave room, as Mr. Alex says, to make things appear where connections can happen. His comment was, we want Idagal to connect with Umbar in the west. So we always try to leave those openings there so that we have opportunities for that kind of expansion in the future as well. So after first we plan, and then we plan some more. So for the world team, getting the first pass hype map is a major first step in for us. Getting that first planning map is a major step for the team as well, because now the team can go forth and start developing their own individual plans. Content team can start thinking about what they're going to do next. Game systems team can think about how their reward schemes are going to work in these areas. And the world team kind of goes back. We have a high level concept for what the biomes of each area is supposed to be. And then we can go back and start looking up source material for that. A lot of our landscape, as I've talked about in the past, is very, very heavily influenced by photography from around the world. So you can see here we've got, we basically have folders of inspirational photography representing kind of what we want to see in different areas of our expansion. We have Atagame, where we were really wanting to lean into kind of this fungally dead forest space, and there are some really horrible looking funguses out there. Kijan, we wanted it to not be desolate. I think one of the lessons that we learned from prior expansion packs is everyone does kind of need thematic breaks throughout everything they're working on. You need a little bit of an oasis every so often in order to kind of to drown out the oppression from the other regions. So you start an out of game, it is this gross, foggy, depressing region, and intentionally so. And the idea is, okay, after that we need to go to Kijan, where Kijan is it is not lush, but it is not dead. There's green, there's flowers there, there's life there. And so we wanted to make sure that we tried to represent that kind of thing. Then we move into Ansharu, where the theme behind it was once this thriving region of resource delving. The Temamir dwarves were actively mining the ridge for its goodness, and there was life in Ansharu, but then the Ordokai came and they stripped it of everything, and now you're left with this barren, salty wasteland that no one wants to live in, and the things that do live in there probably do so pretty grudgingly. And then we move to Idagal, which was once a beautiful land as well, but is the latest victim of Ordokai intrusion in the territories and their resource stripping throughout. Those of you that have played through Idagal can see the barren forest areas with tree stumps strewed about. You can see the strip mines that have the Mumakil there. Like it is not a happy land because they are just there to take it for all it's worth. The only place that they've kind of kept looking nice and kept looking fresh is Emax Duel, and that's because that's where they want to live. That's their home territory. So for us, these are always fun meetings for us to have because we usually what we'll be doing is it'll be the world team and representatives from the art team kind of just sitting around talking about the high level themes for these areas, and we're all just throwing links to pictures that we're finding as we're all like furiously Google searching things and coming up with ideas and coming up with like, oh, look, I know this forest in this area has like this weird kind of plant. Can we do something with that weird kind of plant here? And it's a lot of just like collaborative riffing on ideas. And you know, for some reason we keep coming back to the cordyceps whenever we're building a fungal area. So of course we had to reintroduce that nugget. And we did that in Moria, and everyone was like, "That's kind of gross." And then we were like, "Okay, well, what if the grossest non-gross spiders we had, the sun spiders, got grosser?" So these are always fun meetings. So once we've built our plan, we know kind of the height map, we know the landscape that we're building, we know our themes that we're building. Then we get into the nitty gritty details of how do we, get that data into the game. We need to build our scene files. We need to build our terrain types. We need to set all of our different properties on those spaces. So we have, you can see in this slide, there's a comparison between what our block map data looks like before the expansion pack and after the expansion pack. What we've added in to fill out this region. Um, we have this concept, every single land block has a set of data that can be associated with it. That includes things like, its name, the level that it's intended for, the what day file is being used, where you get sent when you're defeated, zone boundaries, those sorts of things. And so this stage in the process is us doing all of that setup, creating all of that data that then gets hooked in. What you're seeing here are examples of area files and our player level cap. Generally, the player level cap doesn't impact normal servers all that much because that's the only time it will impact you is if you are in land blocks you're not supposed to ever be in. Otherwise, no harm, no foul. Where the player level cap comes in for us is on the legendary worlds, and this allows us to restrict portions of the landscape based off of where the level cap is on that server. So what you're seeing kind of in that middle spot there is a map of Umbar, of Ikerban, and of Shagana representing the different level caps. The blue is the level 150 cap, and that green is the level 160 cap. So on the legendary worlds, until that level cap hits there, you won't be able to go into those areas. On the far right, you can see our scene file process. So we make, so those of you that aren't familiar, scene files are how we kind of randomize landscape assets across the terrain without having to hand place a lot of stuff. Things like grass frills, little rocks, big rocks, trees, sometimes even circling birds in the sky. So these scene files all kind of come together to show off certain looks and feels for areas. What we're seeing here is the representation for the scene files in Ansharu. We usually try to have a bunch of shorthand naming conventions for a lot of these things. So you have SCN, which stands for scene, you have MGH, which stands for Merjala, AS stands for Ansharu, and then a descriptor of the scene file, like what it does. Do we have dense rock files here, no frills, what kinds of trees, like all of those things. That's how we define all of that. And then we get into development. So here are a bunch of shots of at least areas that I was working on for the expansion pack, some Adagim and some Adsharu, showing different stages of development. You can even see some of the tools stuff in the background with the green lines on the landscape. And it's all in progress. If you look down in the bottom middle, you can see a picture of what Jaret Manesh originally looked like. It was originally much more imposing structure, standing up high on everything. And after conversations with the content team and whatnot, there was kind of a desire to make it a little bit more hidden, a little bit less visible. There are still spots where you can see the spires of a few of the buildings from the core of Anshru, but by and large, it was asked that we try to hide it a little bit more, make it feel a little secluded. So the final version, we pulled up the mountains around it and kind of nestled it in there with just a few peaks here and there of what you see. Um, you've got in progress work of Sulmadash and the entrance to the raid up in the top there, the top middle. Those are both very in development. You can see there's no terrain painting right down there. One of the processes we were working with trying to get going for this expansion pack was better timing when even just rudimentary locations are checked in so that when the content team goes to start writing their ideas, they have just physical directions to go off of. A lot of times, there's always this worry that they can't get the quest directions exactly right because they're not quite sure exactly where things are. So we tried to change our process for this update to try to push some of those more fine detail things like rough layouts into development a little bit sooner so that as quest writing occurs, there's actual like things to look at and things for the content team to be inspired by. And then at the end of it all, we've sculpted our terrain, we've done our planning, we've built our day files, we've painted our terrain, we've put down our monster spawns, we've put down our resource nodes, we've built all of the camps, we've gotten the water flow going on what water areas there is. I think Kijan was really the only area that had water flow going with it. We have our map, and this is our overhead view of the Ridge of Plenty. Um, it's really awesome to see the landscape at a view like this because there are times when you look at something like this and you almost feel like you are looking down at a topographic map. You're looking down at satellite photography of a territory, and it always feels really good to see this landscape all come together with the colors that we want it to have, with the assets that we want it to have, and have it just look like a place, look like a real place. Um, if I had any tools request for this whole process, there's this concept called splat maps. I know Unreal uses them, other game development tools use them, where they are just really, really, really large mask textures, basically, that can be assigned to other textures so that you can do a big broad stroke to assign what terrain textures go where. And, I have some ideas about how we can leverage that concept into something for Lotro. It's just we need the time to implement it, but it would be an interesting way for us to further help streamlining our build process, where it would allow us to do terrain painting in something like Photoshop um, prior to doing individual per land block painting, so that instead of us spending a lot of time going through and doing high level broad stroke painting first, we could use our tools and our system to do um, that initial paint first. We know where our cliffs are going to be, we know where our lowlands are going to be, and use use tools to help define that as opposed to bucket filling every single land block we go with that stuff. Carissa asks, you may have covered this before. Which comes first, the landscape or the story? They usually come in tandem. Um, we start region development or expansion pack development in this case with a research pass. We effectively call it story time, where the senior world designer will work with Maid of Lions to kind of come up with the narrative direction for what's going on. Maid of Lions generally runs the narrative ongoing main story push, and it's up to us to kind of fill in the world around that. It's like, oh, hey, we know we want to go to Umbar. All right, we're going to Umbar and Harad. This is kind of the story that we want to tell in Umbar or Harad. Great. We need to figure out the history of Umbar and Harad and write all of that down, and then see where that history can dovetail into the epic story that's going through there, and see how we can come up with details that can inspire both the world designers and the content designers when it comes to actually implementing the landscape. So it is, excuse me, usually somewhat organic, but it's never it is not often a like we hard and fast we do this first and then we do this, because the landscape direction and the narrative direction are very tied to each other. We've been talking about where our path takes us next for Lord of the Rings, and a lot of that is Maid of Lions and Orion and Chris Pearson all kind of talking together about where we want to go next, what ideas, what concepts, the high level direction of things. Crazy Blue Squirrel says, will you guys do some more developer diaries like you did in earlier times? For example, about culture or architecture? I'd very much like this. I don't know what our plans are for development diaries are. I think sometimes, considering the amount of post-production work that is involved with them, and how busy everyone on the team is, it is hard to build them. It's hard to make them available, because not only do we have to build them, then we also need to get them through copy editing, then they need to go to translation, then there's any sort of additional collateral that needs to go along with it, screenshots, that sort of thing. This sort of format, I think, kind of fills that niche a little bit. We just never require anyone on the team to do this sort of thing. Cordovan and I are probably the two most regular ones that do it. Orion does it fairly regularly as well. But for the most part, the team does not do most of the team doesn't really do much of the live streaming aspect of things. I know Chris Pearson does Oxenmoot pretty regularly, which is a significant Tolkien scholar. I think it's Tolkien, but it is a significant conference in England, and has done presentations regarding the work that he has done, specifically about building the histories of Harad and Umbar, and the work that he's done to fill in the gaps of the narrative for Lord of the Rings in general, to make our game work from a story perspective. Next up, we have updating the UI. So after we've built the landscape, we try to, as early as we can, have some initial maps prepared, so that when content and QA start testing things, they can see on the radar, see on a map panel where they're supposed to go, what they're supposed to do. So those are often very, very rough. Those of you that joined the early Bull Roars for the expansion pack might have seen some of the maps were just super placeholder. Green landscape everywhere. I think to the point where the original map for Otagame, we hadn't gotten the terrain textures for Otagame yet, the fungal terrain textures. So I hadn't painted the landscape, but we needed to have a map present for Bullroarer, for QA, for content. And so it was a very, very placeholder map. To the point where, like, when people first saw it on Bullroarer, I think they were really confused about how green it was because they weren't anticipating a super green looking landscape. Um, it's not done until it's done, and so anytime we have a preview like that with early maps, there should always be the expectation that those maps are going to change. The last couple of maps that always come in at the end of a cycle like this are our territory level maps and our stable collection map. So on the left here on this screen, on this slide, you can see the guide for the updates to the Harad map, and along with the keys for, like, these are the kinds of geographic elements that should be present in this map. So you can see high mountain ranges, swamps, dead forests like Imular, arid farmland and plains for Kijan, dry lake bed with some puddles for Idagal, Zajana City, which is meant to be kind of less of a color and more of like the icon for Umbar up in the upper left there. And then New Water, where we're adding or continuing rivers. On the right, we have our map of the Stable Master system. The Stable Master map is often much more abstract than our region, our territory and area maps, largely just because it needs to just show the rough outline for everything, major geographic features in regards to water, at least, and where the stable masters are. So you can see here where all the stable masters that were introduced for the expansion pack are. And those should hopefully line up with where they actually are in world, or close enough. Again, those outlines are super abstract, so there's no guarantee that it's going to be exact one-to-one, but it is good enough for that level of mapping. And so, with that all done, we are effectively at the Q&A portion of our presentation. So thank you everyone for hanging out and enduring my slides. I hope it was informative. I hope it was interesting. I've always enjoyed this component of the world design side, the nitty gritty, I am personally much less of a narrative creative and much more of a build the landscape person. And so the details of building the landscape are what are often more exciting and compelling to me. Figuring out what we're doing for our scene files, how we're getting the data built, how we're getting the data structured, what tools am I using to help make the team at large have an easier time working with the landscape and getting them up and running faster. So that is what is most compelling to me about all of this process is the background work. It's quick, it's satisfying, it's something that I've really enjoyed doing. Noticing my clipping is off. That's gonna bug me in post, but oh well, we'll deal. But yeah, so please feel free to fire away with questions. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I know there are a bunch. So Mr. Alex asks, question, image on the location of New Rivendell housing. Yes, so this is a look down into the Valley of Imladris, into Rivendell, from the new Rivendell housing neighborhood. I wanted to end things out with a bit of a tease. I think that might end up being what my next casual stroll stream is. It depends on where we land on our final timing for everything. But for now, a little sneak peek, a little tease of what you yourself could be looking at from your newly purchased home when it becomes available. Fuseline says, really awesome, and as a geography master, I am happy how much thinking goes into creating landscape. We think a lot. That is our job, to think about building the landscape. I think the thing for me, and the most important thought process currently for me, is wanting to make sure we kind of future proof ourselves. Um, I think during the Gondor era, and even Helm's Deep era of Lotro, we did a lot of copying and pasting of landscapes, and it has made aspects of current team us, made our lives a little bit more difficult because of where certain things are placed. Oh, great, we can't use this anymore. Or, like, we could go further east in this region, but this thing is here and we can't really move this thing. One of the things I did a couple weeks ago was kind of sit down with all of the area blocks for all of our different regions, region 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and kind of line them all up with each other relative to each other, and was just thinking about, like, okay, if we decide to go this direction with whatever we do next, we still have room for things here. If we decide to go that direction, we're going to need a new region. We're going to need a new region 6 that's spoking off of these places, like all of those sorts of things. It's an interesting thought process, but it also, like, it bugs me a little bit how much we copied things, and how we position those copies into our regions. Um, King Cookie asks, is there a chance we could get a behind the scenes look at actually making a piece of landscape at some point, picking small area and showing us how you build it inside the tools? Um, it's something that we have talked about in the past. I think one of the challenges with doing that is, at least with my own development process, I'm often not doing just one thing when I'm building landscape. I am bopping back and forth between, you know, I'm doing a little bit of landscape stuff, but now I'm going into our data files to work on this thing, and then I'm tweaking this thing in text editor, and then I'm going into Photoshop, and then I'm going into a meeting, so I'm not doing work. And so it's really rare, I think, that any of us are actually, like, sitting and dedicating uninterrupted chunk of brain power to one specific thing. So not that we would never do something like that, but I think if we were to do something like that, it would have to be something very tactically and specifically um, allocated for, and we would have to actually, like, really just block out for it. Um, so, so hopefully that doesn't disappoint you too much. Druid's Fire says, and making more housing deco for Yao to put on his site. I do that. I do that. Let's see. Kingdoms of Harad had something like 700 housing items, not all of which were allocated to reward stuff for this expansion pack, but the majority of them were. Rivendell Housing is going to have a ton of stuff for housing, including a bunch of the stuff that I made way back during the Before the Shadow expansion pack that were never allocated. So there is a lot. There is a lot. um, Templar Magi says, Lotro merch when? Or when Lotro merch. Sorry, I let my Yoda out there. Merchandising Lord of the Rings Online is not something that is particularly easy for us to do, considering the nature of us being a licensed product. I think probably Cordovan or Calistria would have a better answer to that question than I would, outside of me just saying, like, it makes it, being a licensed IP makes it difficult for us to produce merchandise for the products that we're making. Um, Not that it's impossible, but it is something that is, uh, it's hard to determine where the, where the benefits and value come from it. Um, and King Cookie also asks, in the early casual strolls, you showed us a lot of unused spaces. Do these still get created in newer content? And if so, uh, could we get a stream exploring some of those at some point? We do have a number of, I think over the years, we try to use everything that we create. There are some, especially older stuff, that are like holdovers from very, very early LOTRO development, or even from Middle Earth Online development, that are still existing in the game world. Um, there are also, every so often there will be spaces made that, you know, someone overachieved and we just, me, uh, where we didn't have the opportunity to take full advantage of those spaces. So, for example, um, Angmar Reborn Karndum has a lot of available space in it to do things. We have an instance interior from the Gundabad expansion pack that was never turned into something because the individual that was working on it, um, found a new opportunity and left the company, and so was not able to complete the instance. So there are a lot of those. I wouldn't say a lot. There are occasionally those sorts of things that come up, but they are not as frequent um, compared to the stuff that exists from super olden times. Um, so yeah, well, thank you everyone for hanging out for my second annual expansion pack white paper, where we talked about what goes into building it. Um, if you have any other questions, let's drop them in. But otherwise, I think I might wrap things up. We got through everything, so thank you everyone for being here. Those of you that have picked up Kingdoms of Harad are enjoying it. I hope you're having an awesome time there. I hope you're enjoying the landscapes that we've built for you. And I hope that you're looking forward to what's coming up next. And we know some of what's coming up next, but we're not ready to talk too much about that yet. So I'll leave it with that tease. As far as things that are going on for this stream, we've got, we'll probably take the holidays off and we'll come back in January for our next stream in this series. I haven't quite decided on what the theme is. It may be an introduction to Rivendell housing. It may be, I've been thinking about doing the rivers of Middle Earth now that we've done the roads of Middle Earth. So it may be one of the two of those. But as we get closer, I will figure that out. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great afternoon, and I hope you are enjoying Kingdoms of Harad. And I will see you all next stream.